joint conversation today with the city of Cincinnati. We have both Ed Cunningham and Art Dahlberg on board. And I stepped away from my other computer, so I don't even have all of your guys' proper titles even. Art's in charge and Ed's in charge. How's that? We'll start from there. Art is actually in charge with the buildings inspection department overall. And then Ed works in charge of, I think many of you know him from working with exterior and building inspectors and such, and Ed is in charge of that. So Ed is directly over this program, and then Art is overseeing it and has been our liaison back and forth with Cincinnati City Council. And this is a process, and I'll put it this way, to remind everybody of kind of where we're at. Literally, probably 3 to 4 years ago, we started the conversation about registration, inspections, what they look like, what is something that we could work with the city. And Art and his team went back kind of behind the scenes, started working on some stuff. They took a document that we had provided to them on the registration side and said, here's something that we appreciate. This is what we would like to see, which is a focusing of resources on problem properties, not just something that goes through and inspects everybody on every unit and puts a lot of red tape and time and effort in there. So they have done that, and we worked with Greg Landsman for approximately a year as council member for City of Cincinnati. He worked with his colleagues and worked with, there's actually about 10 different pieces of legislation that were initially involved. It was reduced down to about 4 of those. Don was legislative chair during that time, so he had many meetings with us on this. We met with Greg a number of times on it and reached some consensus. And 2 of the bigger pieces were the rental inspection program and the rental registration program. One of the pieces that has kind of come up, and again, passing legislation is one thing, and then when you go to implementation, there's always some steps to go through. COVID, of course, has knocked us back several months. So part of the reason I'm going through this is not everybody may remember this whole process. So we have done a lot of conversation over this. This has not been a adversarial process. It has been very much trying to work together on this. And to that extent, that's part of what this conversation is. As this has come to implementation, we have reached a difficulty point, which is the rental dollar amount listed in there as part of the registration. And that is a sticking point that a number of members have raised as this is a hill that they're willing to die on. And I've talked with Greg Landsman, literally we just got off the phone about 40 minutes ago, that we will see what we can do about getting this addressed and fixed as soon as possible. I have properties in the city of Cincinnati as well, and I'm in the process of getting the registration through, and I come to that last button of, is everything I've submitted clear and correct? Well, I don't want to put my dollar amounts in there either, because that's private business information, and why am I doing that? So there's a number of folks, we might go through this, you might get to that point. We are working on a solution to figure out if there's a different way to handle this, if there's a way to resolve it. Having said that, I don't want that to be a sticking point today in our conversation of how this program is to work. The idea behind, and as Greg reiterated even today, the whole goal of the registration program is for communication, for the city to get information out to us as property owners, and for us also to, when we're in this process, making sure that, you know, if there's a crisis, they're not calling, you know, a office number that's not reaching anyone, but that they can actually get to somebody that they need to address, to let them know that something's going on. Things have sped up tremendously in our day and age. This isn't the day and age of faxing even. This is the day and age of texting and email communication. And that's part of what this process is moving towards. And that is a far different process than what even the county has set up. And we worked with the county, 10, 12 years ago in setting up the initial process for registration. Ideally, this will become a shared service between the city and the county, and this will be the model for the county, and ideally then rolled out from there. So we take very seriously the concerns and working through the process. And I know the city does as well. And I appreciate that. I think I can say with Mr. Cunningham, Mr. Dahlberg, we've had unprecedented levels of communication. In speaking with my colleagues across the country, this is not normal. So I appreciate the time and effort they have done on reaching out with us to work through this process as well. So with that, I'm going to ask them to go through a presentation here and kind of show what they're looking at, fill in some holes if I've left blanks out. But with that, gentlemen, please, Art, Ed, appreciate you guys being here today.
Well, thank you, Charles. I do appreciate all of your cooperation and your organization's cooperation. I think ultimately we're going to be at a good place. I recognize there may be a few issues that we all may not agree on, but I also know you understand at this point in time it's in the ordinance. So what I do has to follow the ordinance, and what Charles does with council is to see whether or not they can get the ordinance changed. So hopefully we can set that aside and we can go through the broader discussions. On the registration program, I think it's, I think we've all experienced that some folks don't keep the auditor's website up to date. And with that, we lose the ability to be able to talk to people, especially, quite frankly, sometimes after hours when, you know, something terrible has happened to a building and we want to be able to get it either secure or at least let you know so that you can protect your financial investment in those buildings. So being able to have phone numbers and having email addresses that are up to date and current is critically important, I think, for both sides of the operating of rental properties in the city. So I would say that's really the number one thing that we wanted to be able to achieve out of this was how do we communicate and how do we communicate well. Sometimes it gets a little frustrating in this day and age of modern technology that I don't have email addresses for people to be able to reach out to. So this will help solve that. And of course, that gives you a direct line of communication back to us as well. Without drilling down on a whole bunch of the reasons why, let's start with the registration program, Charles, if it makes sense, and let's do a little demo of how you actually register a property. And then maybe once we get done with that, we can swing back to the inspection program. Is that okay? All right, Ed, let's go ahead and start working through the PowerPoint for folks.
Very good. Can all see that? Can you see and hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, good. We'll get started then. Thank you, Charles, and all for joining us. Appreciate this opportunity. So I'm just going to kind of quickly walk you through the online registration part of this. And, you know, the first thing that we'll have to do is to create an account. And what that is just in our system, EasyTrack, we have an online services. If you, when you create your account, you'll also be able to use that, you know, for other services and permits and things that, you know, the building department, provides. So maybe you'll get more use out of it than a one shot. So we go to the website here, and there's a link to it. You can get to a link from our website on our building department web page. And the first step, like I said, is to go ahead and register create a registration or an account. And you do that by selecting this registration button up here in the right corner. And then it's going to ask you to review basically a disclaimer type thing, pretty standard. And then the first thing is to create a login, okay? This will be your username, of course, email, and you create a password. Then when you get here, you can make up your own security question. I think I used, what was my first car? And it was a 65 Ford. So you go from there, add, then you add the contact information. You've created your user information. Now you're going to add the contact information here. And this is where you'll put your name and so forth. And whatever you put in here, later on, you'll see you'll be able to click a button and have this load in so you don't have to retype everything. So we'll go ahead. And then once you've done that, you'll get this green bar here that'll indicate that you've successfully created the account. And then up in the upper right-hand corner of that screen there, there'll be new over here. And then you'll select residential rental registration from that. You go to new residential rental registration. Then you're going to go ahead and register your property. First thing you do is put in the address, and then you hit next. It'll pull your property up on a map here. Then you simply select apply for the rental registration. And then you have to check this information to make sure it's the right building address and everything you're trying to register. Then you just hit that button there. It'll automatically pull in the parcel number for you. And then you continue. If at any time you get interrupted, you want to save your work and come back to it, you hit this orange button down here in the corner. Next, this is where you get into the actual rental registration part of this. At the top is a kind of a triage to see if your property is even eligible or has to be registered. There's a few cases, hotels, motels that are not, they don't have to be registered. If you answer yes, it'll tell you basically you don't have to register. If you're let's say your entire building is all short-term rental and you have it registered with the treasurer, we're not interested in having that registered here again. You don't have to if you're already a short-term rental, the entire building, all units. So anyway, you get over here, and again, this gets a little bit into getting some idea how much affordable rental property there is out there. So it talks about is the water and utilities included, et cetera. And here it asks you how many total units are in your building. If you have a 4-family, why, of course, it'd be 4. If you have a house, you're renting a single-family house, it would be 1. And then you get into this part here. This is another attempt to gather information to assess whether we have accessible housing for folks that need it. Yes or no, do you have accessible units? And this is really wheelchair accessibility at this point. If you say yes, you'll get a drop down that will show some more, a little more detailed questions about how accessible it is. And then finally, you get into the units themselves. They ask how many 1-bedrooms you have. So if you put a 4 up here where it says how many units do you have, and for some reason you only put 1 here, maybe, and 2, and it only equals 3, you're going to get an error message. Okay, so if you got, let's say there's 2 1-bedrooms on the first, one on each floor, and then there's a 2-bedroom on each floor. So it'd be 2 here, 2 1-bedrooms. Put the approximate average size of those 1-bedrooms, gross floor area, and then you're going to put in the average rent for that, and that is not, again, this has already been discussed, but it's not the exact amount. It's kind of an average across, the board, some idea what the rents are going for in the building. And then how many bathrooms, are in the property? Is it a bath and a half? Is it 1, 2? And then you do that same thing on down to cover your entire building. You don't have to answer all these if you don't have any. So if you've only got 1 and 2 bedrooms, that's all you got to worry about. Once you fill this out, you then move on to the, well, there's a little more on it. This is available too on our website for you to look at. Next step here is to get the property owner information, the heart of the program here. Now this first thing, if your property is owned by a business or a corporation or association or some kind of a business entity, what we're looking for is to kind of drill down and get a person that we can contact if we need to. So if you look at this little matrix here, if you're a corporation, we're looking for the name of a corporate officer. And then a partnership, obviously a partner we're looking for. If you're an individual, many of us own property, they're individuals, you would be then the property owner. So you kind of remember what this relationship is here based upon the type of entity that you own or operate. If you're a limited liability corporation, you want to put a member or manager. Okay, so having said that, let's continue. Next screen you'll see is this. Let me back up. See this select from account right here, this button? If you select that, the information that you put in the beginning will be available to you. So you'll see it. Oh, they didn't do it on this particular, let me see here. If you put select from account, you'll be able to just check a box and it'll automatically load in everything you've entered in the very beginning, okay? To save you the time of having to retype all this. Some it's the same person all the way down. So the primary contact, that's the person who's going to be the communicator with the city primarily, okay? Get the emails and probably be the person that's registering even. It depends on how you're set up. Person in control, it could be a management company you've hired. Maybe it's an out-of-town business that they have a local management company. It might be a person associated with that. They could put in for that. Person in control. There's a little definition there if you want to know what it is. Again, add that stuff in. And then finally, this is an important one here, the emergency contact. And this is somebody that lives within 100 miles of the property that's able to respond. If you have a large complex, it could be a resident manager or a resident maintenance person, or could be yourself if you live within 100 miles, or whoever you have as a local agent looking after things. So once you've established that information, you're pretty well done. You're going to go here and check over the stuff, make sure everything's accurate. And you can go back and edit it if you like, or if you think you made a mistake, you can review this stuff by hitting the edit button here, the blue. It'll show you what you entered. If you're confident everything's accurate for you, Charles mentioned this little box here. It just says, I attest that this information is true, best of my knowledge and belief. And then you check this little box. Basically, you're signing the application. If we had a paper one, why you'd be signing it at the bottom. So it's the same idea here. Once you've done that, you're good with it. Go ahead and move into to review it'll calculate what this costs. It's $1 per unit. And then there's a couple of small surcharges of 1% and 3%. So it comes up to $1.04 per unit. And then once you've look that over and make sure it's right, why you're ready to check out, and you hit the checkout, and then you can pay right now with a major credit card. We've had some folks that, you know, mom and pop, they don't even have a computer. So we've created a paper form and a process for them so they can handle it that way to do the best we can to accommodate them. So you go ahead and pay it online here. It's a simple, easy way to do it. And that's basically it. When you do that, your application will close and lock, and you will receive an email, okay, and it'll be a little certificate in there, basically showing that you registered, and the information that you entered, the majority of it, will be on that certificate for your records. And that's essentially it for the registration.
So Ed, there's a question, I'll just kind of ask it, is going through this for each property. And I think the point I want to mention is this is a one-time process that will take an overall account, and from that account, each property will be added in there. And then once they're in, part of the idea behind the database is the only time you really need to going to mess with that as much as changing data is when there's actual data to change. So if you buy or sell a property, or if you've got a new contact information, that's when you're going to need to go in and change something. Other than that, ideally, this becomes a hands-off process once the data is put in.
That's correct, Charlie. I might
Craig,
add. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I was going to add one thing for the.
No, I was just going to say.
After you.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. These Zoom meetings.
Sorry.
Okay. What I wanted to mention, Charles, you said multiple properties. If you've got a number of buildings, when you get to the very end where it's time to pay, don't pay because you're going to go ahead and put all of it in and pay at once. Okay. When you get to the end where it says pay, go back up to new, and then go ahead, rental registration, and then you put the next one in. And then when you're finished, why you'll have everything there, and you can just pay once and be done with it.
And part of that idea is trying to simplify it. Again, putting the data in the first time is always the most difficult and time consuming. Ideally, once that's in, and we've had members ask us, you guys have most of this information already, can you go ahead and submit it for us? And we're like, no, it has to be each individual organization doing it and going from there. So that's where it's at this point. The question that comes up is repeatedly, and this is something we discussed during the council process, was who has access to this information. And kind of the point, Director Dahlberg, I know you've mentioned on this, on the public facing side of this is not publicly available, but if somebody does do a Freedom of Information Act request, it can be requested. So, you know, encourage folks to, and Art, I'll let you kind of respond on that piece of it, on the public information side of it.
Yeah, so Charles, you said it absolutely correctly. We aren't designing this for as a search tool for people out in the community to be going and trying to find phone numbers for people who are managing properties. This is for internal use, but it is a public record, and because we are a public entity, public records are subject to FOIA. So somebody can come on in and file a FOIA request. What I have found, and I'm sure all of you have as well, if it isn't easily accessible, people usually don't go through that process unless there's a higher level of motivation for them. So yeah, it's a public record, but no, we aren't publishing it out there for the world to see.
So I say that, and we want to mention this just as a concern is, you know, and even, you know, we had the Cincinnati Enquirer in the conversation at one point because they're very much advocates of having the information all being public and available. And our point was, look, I'm not going to put my cell phone number in there if it's posted on the website. I'll give you a Google number and maybe I'll get that at some point later on, you know, the message when it comes through. The city, to the extent that they can, has tried to protect that information so it's not available, but that it will be used internally within the city. And I think we can clarify a little bit if you want to even mention who has access to the information within the city to kind of clarify so people know on that side of it. But trying to make this, you know, a communication tool so that whether it's a cell phone number or an email, that if you put that in there, you're not going to be getting, you know, tons of information from all different people who bought and sold this information. That's not what this is about. This is about keeping the information protected so that the city, when they need to, can reach out to property owners.
Yeah, so to follow up on your comment, Charles, the data resides in the buildings and inspections. We're the custodian of the records. It certainly is accessible by the law department, for example, and I don't believe we've had it set up yet, but certainly we would share this information with the police department if they're trying to get a hold of a property owner or a property manager. But that's really the extent of it.
I'm putting on here, there's a question about the dollar amount, just going back to, it's $1 per unit. Technically it's $1.04 with fees, charges on there. And then also, so managing as far as registering the properties, you want to register, it's registering a building, and then it's internally. So example, I have a 26 unit building with 14 two bedrooms and 12 one bedrooms, putting that information in there and letting it be. And as each of you know very well, you may have 12 units or 12 floor plans with different square footages. They're not asking for, let me give me that 12 different variations. These are rough numbers, kind of giving rough estimates and saying that's the best of my knowledge, approximately what we're looking at. And I think that's a fair statement, correct, Ed and Art, on that?
Yes.
So.
And while there are other places who charge significantly more per unit for a registration, we tried to, sorry, phone's going crazy. We tried to keep this cost as low as possible. That's why we went the electronic route. So that's why it's at $1 per unit. That's why, and part of the way we can keep it that way is because you're not giving us paper. You're putting it in the system. I mean, what I didn't want is for this to be viewed as anything other than a mechanism for us to be able to talk with one another. So that's really what this is all about. And hopefully everybody appreciates it isn't like some other communities that are charging $30 a unit and the like. This was held as low as possible, and we're trying to use technology to make it work. So when you get a little frustrated because the first time you go on any new computer system, of course, it is new to you and it can be frustrating. Please remember that that's how we're trying to keep these costs low.
One of the questions was penalties for not registering.
Well, let's talk about how we're planning to roll this on out, and then we'll talk about the penalty, okay? So my intent, like we do with virtually any new program that we roll on out, this is all about education. So we send out approximately 20,000 letters. I think it was 2 weeks ago now, Ed, something like that. So that's the first step. We hope that we get a high level of voluntary compliance. We will wait probably 60 days, and then we will figure out how we can nudge those who haven't registered. The idea of immediately jumping into doing a penalty phase doesn't make sense to me. This fall will be about educating people. So it's very possible that we may need to do a series of these kind of Zoom conference calls to get the message on out. Once we're able to actually talk in real life, we're happy to do that too. The penalty, that what is built into the code is it's called a class, failure to register is a Class D civil offense. Ed, I'm hopeful you have that chart memorized and you can tell us what a Class D is.
Well, that should give you some idea of how much we're interested in finding, because I haven't even looked it up. I haven't memorized it. I looked it up a while ago. It's pretty high. It's like, I don't know. I'd hazard it's around 500, but you know, I'll have to look that up, Charles, and confirm it. It's in the municipal code.
But the point though is, and part of the point though, and I appreciate Art mentioning this, and this is part of why we're doing this process, is that we don't want to go down that road. The city does not want to go down the road of registration, or it doesn't want to go down the road of registration fines. They want to go down the road of registration and communication. That's been a clear message we've been working on for the last several years. And so we're trying to continue that communication. That's why this will be recorded. The information will be out there. We'll provide this on our website. We will continue to do this. And I'm going to address a couple of questions that have come in. One is, Missy mentioned about the unit size and the pricing. This was, remember in the backdrop pre-COVID, go back to pre-COVID, we started talking, there was a whole push on affordability and evictions and anti-eviction efforts. And like anybody does more anti-eviction than us, but you know, that being said, what people are focused on is, do we need more information? And that's where those two pieces came into the discussion. And we have since reached a level of concern among members that is too much information, specifically the attorneys saying, look, we've got folks who give dynamic pricing and I can't give you a dollar amount and sign off on this, and the next day I'm wrong and now I'm in violation. So how do we address this? Others are saying, look, that's private information. That is a trade secret. That is not something I want put out there. Those are all valid points. And we are going to be discussing that. As I mentioned, we were discussing that with Councilmember Landsman before this call even. And he said, we will be working through that to see if we can get that resolved with council and get something addressed on that side of it. So Joe mentioned about if there's recourse if data gets out. So the data will be out there, okay? Just what you post up there, please understand that could at some point become public information. So if that means that you do not want, you know, your most private cell phone number out there, don't post it. But a good email should probably be used. Encouraged to use as best information as you can put out there, but maybe not your private email. Make sure it's a business email, but something you still have access to and can be reached with. So we'll go from there. This is from a registration perspective, and gentlemen, on a fee side of this, is this an annual? Is this how are we doing this fee process?
Okay, so what the law says is you are to register once, and then you are to update information as information changes. There's not an annual renewal process or anything like that. It's once we get everybody's email addresses, I would imagine I will be sending out email blasts once a year to ask you to double check your information to make sure it's correct. But you only update once the information changes. And I don't believe, and I will have to get back with you, Charles, I don't believe there's a charge for updating. It's the charge for the original registration.
That's what I thought. That's why I kind of asked it open-ended. There's a question on here about about inspections. So let's address that. And this is where I want to really commend the city for working with us on this. And I think at one point I was even given some pushback, and the city came back and said, this was your recommendation. So, you know, a little give and take back and forth as we work through this. But the idea that we have long supported is that there are good owners who take care of their property. There are problem owners who do not take care of their property. And we have all had properties nearby next to some of these problem properties. I think the estimate is anywhere from 3 to 5% of ownership tends to have problems. And I'm sure Art and Ed have detailed information in there about how bad or how few there are, and what the percentages are. But our focus has been educate those who don't know, and those who will not respond, and those who turn their back and say, I'm not going to take care of my property, you can't make me. Well, those are the folks that, you know what, go after them and let them pay for the program. And that's really where the rental registration program moves into a rental inspection program. If you've got people who have not taken care of their property, they have violations, building code violations that have not been addressed, have not been taken care of, let's frankly put, honestly, those are not our members. So go after them. And what it takes to bring them into compliance, that's what's going to be needed. And that's really where the inspection program is focused at. I don't know if you want to kind of touch on the overarching program. It's a pilot program right now with a 4-year time frame in specific communities. I don't know who wants to kind of address that part of the program.
Yeah, let me sort of give kind of the big picture piece of it, and thank you for the great introduction, Charles. I think you really illustrated kind of where we started and where we've ended on up, and I think it's been a really good give and take. The goal here is to deal with problem properties and deal with problem properties through this pilot program within 3 discrete neighborhoods. They're the Cuff neighborhood, they're the East Price Hill neighborhood, and they're the Avondale neighborhood. The reason for those neighborhoods are each one of them has a fairly significantly high number of complaints in it compared to the overall city average. And each one of them has some unique characteristics of the neighborhood. So it gives a really good test for this being a pilot program. I won't spend a whole lot of time talking about those unique characteristics. Those of you who are familiar with those neighborhoods, you will appreciate those. One of the things I would go back to is the huge majority of people know how to maintain property and maintain property well. The smaller number of properties that end up coming to us as complaints when we go through our normal issuing orders, we get roughly 85 to 90% voluntary compliance. And I call voluntary compliance anything that doesn't require me to issue a civil citation that has money associated with it. So the huge majority of property owners, even when given orders, are ones that respect their responsibility and respect their property and respect the neighborhood that their property resides in. It is a much smaller group of properties where people buy property and they tend to just pull all of the value out of the property and then throw the property away. And those are the kind of properties that may be small in number, but really take a lot of effort on our parts, the community parts, and quite frankly, the neighboring property owners as well, which many of them are rental owners as well, have to all come together and deal with, you know, it's not just us, it eventually goes into the law department as well. So what we're really trying to focus on, and I think, Charles, you said it better than I probably could, is the problem property owners and bring enough attention to them. But even recognizing that we are saying it's the problem property owners, this is not a hard hammer with no other options available to it. So the idea here is that we will be sending letters out to those small number of properties. We will tell them on the front end, we'll give them a self-inspection checklist. We'll ask them to inspect before we come there, resolve those issues, so hopefully they will have a successful inspection. If when they don't have a successful inspection, we will be issuing orders. We'll also be putting the property into 3 different categories. One, of course, is compliant, so no orders. The other one is substantially compliant, which means, yeah, there's a couple of problems at the property that seem to be resolvable, but when looking at the property, you can see that the property is being well managed and being well maintained. And then the final category is properties that are non-compliant. And the importance of those 2 different categories is how will we deal with the property once the property violations are corrected. If it is a substantially compliant property, once the violations are corrected, we're going to be putting them in a 4-year certification process, which means you won't see me again until the end of the program, provided we don't get complaints on the property in the meanwhile. The ones that are non-compliant, they will be put in an annual process until we see that they have raised the bar on their maintenance approach to the building so that we can call it a substantially compliant building. So that's one piece. Then what happens post orders being issued? Well, the first thing is there's a preferential path and there's a non-preferential path. The preferential path is the property owner, property manager looks at the orders, sees that what they need to do, and submits a work plan back to us, and we agree that the work plan makes sense, and then we just monitor against the work plan. So there may be times where your work plan and what our original term of compliance due date don't match up, but it will be based on the information you provide to us to show us that, yep, you're going to be doing a re-roof job, but it is in the 2nd quarter of the year as opposed to into the next 30 days. So that's the preferential pathway. The non-preferential pathway is where we don't hear back from you, and when we go on out and do a re-inspection after 30 days, we see that you haven't moved forward and we're not having any communication going backwards and forwards. In that case, we will be doing monthly re-inspections with a graduated schedule of inspection fees associated with that. The whole point of that is to get people's attention, to take care of the building. Again, it's a problem building. It isn't just ordinary buildings that everybody owns, but it's ones that we've had a history with in one way or another. So nuts and bolts wise, that's kind of what we're talking about. We hope that through having these conversations with your organization and other organizations and trying to educate people that even those problem properties, people will take that preferential pathway, give us a work plan, and we just make sure that we all comply with the work plan.
So, Art, let me mention, go ahead, Don.
Can you talk for a minute about the inspection process? So as you're going back in and maybe that's a resident generated phone call that's, or whatever, and you're coming in to do the process, the inspection. Is this, you're going in on a 100-unit property, you're going in every unit, or are you going in the unit of the property, unit of the resident who is calling that particular issue in, or an issue that you've had in that specific building?
Let me try and answer that, Don. So we are going to be doing every unit at a building that has fit into that category of being a problem property in one of these 3 pilot neighborhoods. So if it was going to be more of a citywide inspection program that was touching every rental property, not just problem properties, I would understand doing kind of a sampling approach, Don, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about problem properties that we have not yet been able to get the property owner manager to make a resolution to. So it will be every unit, but again, we are sending out with the initial announcement of your properties in the program, the checklist for you to work against. What I hope is everybody takes that seriously. They go and look at their property. They clean up any challenges that are associated with the property so that when we come on out, we can give it a clean bill of health.
And to clarify, Don, this isn't for, we filed eviction on somebody and they walked over, punched a couple holes in the wall, called an inspector and said, hey, look, there's a problem with this property. That there's holes punched in walls, there's multiple things going on. They haven't been responded to, they haven't been addressed. That's how a property ends up getting into that category. And that was part of our discussion all along, is to limit that category to what each of us would recognize as not proper management.
And I agree.
So that they're not,
I agree with that, but there's also been, from what we originally agreed to with Councilman Landsman to what come out is not the same either. So that's why I wanted to make sure that is also just so is covered as well. So
there is a provision in the code that if, let's say, a property gets by the numbers, winds up in the program, if, let's say, something like you talked about where it was a tenant damage, for example, and a few other things that made it come on our radar, it's in the code that the person can contest that, present, here's what's really going on here. I really don't have a management problem. And then they could be excluded. We want to be fair. So there is a way to get those kinds of things looked at deeper. And I might add that it's not really the entire neighborhoods. There's 12 census tracts. So for example, Avondale, it's not the entire neighborhood. It's just certain census tracts that have statistically a lot of apartment buildings in them. So it's East Price Hill, Cuff, and Avondale are the 3 areas and sub areas, census tracts within those areas. The pilot.
And the tool that Ed is talking about is what we call a director's determination. So it isn't going to the inspector to be making that determination. You're sending me information and I'm the one that's making that decision. And what I'm going to be basing it on is what you send me, and we'll have conversations about it. If what you're coming back and showing me is, look, I had a problem tenant who went off the rails with me, and when you look at the damage, you'll see that the holes in the ceiling match exactly the diameter of the broom that they had sitting in there. I will reach the conclusion that it was a problem tenant and you've solved that problem, and I don't have any other history on the property, then fine, we'll exempt on out. That's the tool, and that's the approach that we'll take. And hopefully enough of you have dealt with me in the past that you know that we will give you a fair shot to be making that argument.
One of the questions that was raised was on the issue of, I'm going back to the registration process here for a moment, on the duplication. So we recognize that there's a county auditor process, and those of us who've sent our PDFs in, and I can tell you I still have a property that still, after 3 different PDFs, has still not been updated properly. That is part of the process that we were working towards. We put that process in place years ago to make sure that we didn't have every municipality putting in new registrations and new fees, and you're working on 48 different ones just in Hamilton County. So the idea is, let's move from a PDF process. The city is looking at a shared services process with the city, or the city right now, that will then go out to the county and the county utilize this. And so we're looking at a transition process right now. Art, Ed, I don't know if you guys want to touch on that, or.
Well, I think, Charles, there's been a lot of conversation between Councilmember Landsman and Mr. Rhodes. So I hope at the end of the day, what will happen is we will have this database, this process that will be viewed as, this is a whole lot easier, a whole lot faster, a whole lot simpler. And we will certainly be glad to share the technology with the auditor's office at any point in time. So I think right now they're probably in a wait and see perspective, and hopefully they'll come back and see that it makes sense for them to change their business model from what they do right now to a more electronic model.
Yeah, I might add that the outfit that's creating our software is the same one that the county uses. In fact, we went in together with the county to get a better price on the software. So whatever we develop is going to be the Cincinnati Area Geographic Information System. They are also members, so it'll be there. So we hope that we can make it more uniform.
So, other questions from folks? I would get a poll up here for, comfort levels, questions. I would encourage you to reach out to me. I'm going to put my email in here just so everybody has it as well. But just, as this goes forward, and look for, like I said, the one issue is that dollar amount, and maybe it's even changing the language it'll be changing the language in the ordinance itself, but figuring out what that fix is and what we can work with council to get that addressed rather rapidly here. That's what we're working towards. So we'll see what we can do on this part of it. Other questions or comments from folks? Posted my email address on there. If you have follow-up comments or thoughts on this, I'd love to hear them. Additional information we need to get out or provide. Again, this is a culmination of multiple years of progress and communication with the city. So appreciate the time with the city on that.
Thank you,
well, thank you, Charles. And I will just say that the PowerPoint, I appreciate you getting it out to all of your membership, and we'll have it on our webpage as well for anybody who needs a little bit of guidance as they're trying to work through registering their properties.
Appreciate that. I'm sure we'll have more updates on more communication on this. Thank you guys for joining us today. I don't see any other questions coming in, so hopefully we've reached a level of understanding that we can make this effective for everyone. And as one of the folks mentioned, they mentioned the rental control or rent control and such. That is not anything along the lines of what our area is focused on, our council is focused on, this legislation is focused on. Right. This is really about making sure we're building communication and building and focusing limited resources on problem properties. So thank you guys for working with us on this, and I'll be following up with you. And thank you everyone for being members, and hopefully you find this helpful.
Yeah, thank you to the members who took the time out of their day.
Thank you guys.
Appreciate that. And your association, Charles, and you too. Thank you.